It was 1995. My family and I moved to a new house in a fairly new suburb at the time. My parents thought of it as the perfect split-level house, spacious and family-friendly, even with an outdoor spa. They bought the house as second owners from a couple with 3 kids who were divorcing. We were a happy family. From the first day we moved in, my parents complained about bees in a wall. They had a pest removalist come and exterminate the bees. Same night, my mum had a dream of a woman with long black hair and a red dress chasing her. She didn't think too much of it, as it was just a dream. Had a cousin come stay with us from overseas a year later, and we recently found out he told another family member after going back to his country about seeing a lady at ours. He gave the same description as what my mum saw. After that, weird things started happening. My dad had troubles as his close-knit brothers and a sister who came to our house with their families almost every weekend turned on him without warning. His personality gradually changed as he became arrogant and angry. He died young and suddenly at home in 2001, which forced us to move house. Our front pergola caved in. I was having issues at school. My brother was always sick, and the birds in our aviary were dying, one by one, even after my dad just bought them as young ones. I had even seen a faint spectre of a woman from the dining room upon coming home from school by the front door. I stared at it until it disappeared through the front door as soon as my dad came home from work. Last night in our home, my mum dreamt of the same woman again, saying goodbye. At our new house, no issues. We heard from our old neighbors that our next door neighbor's granddaughter took her own life on their property. 6 degrees of separation. I eventually worked with a lady whose son married one of the 3 girls of the divorced couple who sold us the house. Her daughter-in-law's mother relayed information through her that confirmed my suspicions too. I have since been doing research via libraries and the local council for information, as I'm still intrigued to this day. So it makes me question, what happened on the property or land before the house was built? Was there a murder that took place there? Or even the woman's body buried beneath the house? Was the woman's intent to ruin people's happiness? Did my dad get possessed by something? How are the owners who bought from us going with their experiences there?
About 3 years ago, my mate Peter and I decided to go stay out at my nan and pop's farm, which is located just outside of Bathurst, New South Wales. About a 20-minute drive. The farm's name is Clear Creek. Now, there are quite a few ghost stories out there, considering my distant relatives built the farmhouse 300 years ago. From hearing all of these stories, we decided that we would go and investigate for ourselves. Me personally, I believe in the spirit world. However, Peter did not. There was one story about a paddock which we called the corn paddock. According to stories, 100 or so First Nations people lost their lives in that paddock, back when the Aboriginal people were kept as slaves to the white man. We decided we were going to camp in that paddock. About 3 hours after the sun had gone down, we were sitting around a campfire. We were just beginning to get ourselves warm when we heard someone or something moving in the bushes behind us. We decided to take a look to see what it was, but nothing was there. We retreated back to our campfire to talk about some of the stories we had heard. After about an hour or so, we were just about ready to go to bed when we heard the same kind of movement behind us. This time, we decided to ignore it. But my friend Peter, the absolute dickhead, decided for some stupid reason to shout out loud, "I mock thy spirits." After he had said that, I had a go at him, told him that spirits are not to be messed with, and this stuff should be treated with respect. With that, a slow wind started to blow, which sent a shiver down my spine. The wind started to pick up and get heavier. With that, we decided to go for cover in the tent we had set up. Almost right away, we heard a woman scream. It was a sickening, ear-piercing scream. After that, myself and Peter decided not to tempt fate any further, and we ran all the way home.
When I was a teenager, like 13 or 14 years old, one of my mates from school lived in a kind of rural area. It's hard to describe. We lived in the suburbs, but his area was a little further out and less suburban looking at the time. This was 25 years ago. It was kind of suburbs, but hilly and surrounded by forest. I went to his place to stay from time to time, because there was always adventures to be had around his place. One day, he mentions that there are caves near his house, old mine shafts, to be more precise. They were in a kind of national park. I was super interested to go check them out with him, so we planned to go the following weekend, and I'd stay over the night before, so we could set out early the next morning. The weekend came around, and we set out around 8 a.m. We went to the supermarket on the way to stock up on drinks and snacks, and made our way to the caves. The national park was huge and beautiful. It was a great morning for a hike too. Not too hot and not too cold, with a nice blue-skied sunny day. We came to our first cave in the first 20 minutes of hiking. We grabbed our torches, or flashlights, and went in. It was only short, ending in a small chamber. At the far end of the chamber was a sturdy, locked cage-type gate. My friend told me some were locked off due to the very real chance of cave-ins or flooding on the lower levels. Since the cave wasn't too long, it wasn't too dark. With a small amount of sunlight coming in from the entryway, we took a break and sat and ate some snacks. It was good being out and about. I was never a fan of early mornings, but this was an exception. We resumed our trip after that short break and came across several more similar caves. There were a few longer ones with evidence of people using them for underage drinking. Candles and beer cans coupled with shitty teenage graffiti. But these were an exception, and not too bad. For the most part, people seemed to respect the caves to an extent, and cleaned up after themselves. After about an hour and a half, we came across one that was a bit different from the others. It was a longer one, but evidence of people using it for anything was minimal. I was too embarrassed to say so at the time, but I got a really weird feeling when we entered it. It was weird because we had been in so many, and I felt nothing but this just made me feel uneasy. I looked at my mate, and he seemed fine, so I didn't say anything, not wanting to appear soft. When we got to the end, where the metal gate was, we found that it was unlocked and open. In fact, when we got closer, the wind seemed to blow it open slightly, although I didn't feel any wind. I got a chill up my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was like something was inviting us in. Without hesitating, my mate was like, "Let's go." I was a little taken aback. How could he not be picking up on the bad vibes here? But I ended up not saying anything, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid and didn't want him hassling me later about it. I regret this now. So, in we went. It was so dark in there. Our flashlights barely lit a couple of meters ahead of us. The tunnel seemed to go on and on. There was zero evidence of anyone having been there. "What do you think we'll find?" my friend whispered to me. "Dunno," I managed to mumble out. Unease was really starting to hit me now, to the point that I was beginning to feel nauseous. And then, it got worse. I felt wind start to blow around my ankles. At first I paid it no mind, but then I thought, where is this sudden wind coming from? The temperature seemed to get colder at each step too. Then, I felt the wind brush past my shoulder and face. My heart was beating so hard that I imagined it was echoing in the tunnel. Then, I started hearing whispering all around me. It was faint and hard to work out the words. I stopped in my tracks and listened. When I stopped, it seemed to stop too. And then the most bone-chilling sound I had ever heard could be heard in the distance in front of us. Low at first, but deafeningly loud in no time. It was the bellowing scream of a man. One at first, but then I could make out multiple voices. I felt what felt like hands start to grab at me, and I could take it no more. I took off in a sprint, back towards the exit. I could only half see the way because my hand that was holding the flashlight was pumping up and down so hard, as it does when you sprint. I scraped my arms, legs and shoulder against the rough rock walls several times, but I didn't care. It felt like I was running endlessly, but eventually I reached the gate which I collided into. I thought it would be open, but for some reason it was shut. In my panic, I couldn't seem to work out how to open it. Eventually, I managed, and it swung towards me, and I left, my friend not far behind me. We finally got out and kept running until we realized we were out. Upon realizing this, we collapsed into an exhausted heap, struggling to regain our breath. I'm not proud of this, but I also vomited on myself due to the overexertion. It was my only shirt for that weekend too, and I had to borrow one of my mates while we cleaned up mine in secret, because for some reason, we thought we'd be in trouble. Just before we got up and left the area where we collapsed, I took one look back at the cave. It was kinda involuntary. I wasn't even thinking about it. When my eyes landed on the cave entrance, I swear I could see a shadowy figure standing in the darkness, staring at us. I shot a look at my mate, and he saw it too. I was this close to puking again, but I managed to hold it down. We got up and hurriedly left the area. That was enough adventure for one day. We went back there a year or so later for nostalgia's sake. We also felt bigger and tougher. That particular cave was heavily locked off, with no trespassing signs on it, threatening hefty fines. Probably for the best thinking back. Teenage bravado makes young boys do stupid things sometimes, and we may not have escaped so easily a second time.
I was staying at my grandparents' place, which is where my auntie and her 2 children also live. My auntie was due to go into hospital the next day, so myself and another of my cousins were staying to help out the 2 kids because my nan and pop were away at the time. There are 3 rooms in this house, all closely located. My cousin Stephen was to sleep in his own room, further from where I was sleeping in my cousin Kate's room. Kate was going to sleep in my nan and pop's room with my other cousin, Rachel. My aunt was going to sleep on the couch as she didn't want to wake anyone, getting up every 5 minutes to go to the loo. Everyone was getting ready for bed and I was laying on Kate's bed, waiting for my aunt to turn out the light for me. I was like 11 at the time. As I lay there, with my eyes closed, I could feel this pouring sensation at the end of my legs. They had several dogs and cats. I assumed it was one of them. But when I looked up to see which one it was, there was nothing there. But I could still feel that sensation. Then my aunt came to the door and handed me their new little kitten to sleep with and turned out the light. I was a bit freaked out now, so I laid there, patting the cat who was staring up at the wall behind my head. The cat then flipped out and took off out of the room as the door was open. I looked up and felt strangely cold. This was strange because it was still summer and it was very hot. Her bed was placed next to a window. You could hear everything that was going on outside. I was still trying to sleep when I heard the sound of two men talking outside. At first, I thought it was someone walking past the yard's fence, but I realized that the language they were using, it was too formal to be anyone who lived in this area. I looked outside to see who it was, but there was no one there. But still, I could hear the two men talking. As I laid back down, my cousin Kate scared me because I was really freaked out now and could just make out her outline. It was very dark in the hall. I yelled at her and chased her out of the room, back into where she was sleeping, and I shut the door to that room. I laid back down on my bed and I could not sleep. I could no longer hear the two men talking, but I felt cold again. I was going to get up to go find another blanket and looked over towards the doorway where the light switch was next to. In the doorway, I could once again make out the outline of a little girl. I froze because I knew it couldn't be my cousin Kate, as the girl had much longer hair and was shorter than Kate. Also, the doors in my Nan and Pop's house, they squeak very loudly if they're opened or closed. And I had heard nothing, so she couldn't have opened the door again. When I realized that this was not Kate, I looked at the figure who had something gleaming in her hand. I thought this to be a long knife blade. The figure then slowly moved in towards me, and as it did, I screamed as loudly as I could for my aunt to come. My auntie came quickly and turned on the light, asking me what was wrong. I just ignored her and jumped out of the bed, ran into where my cousin Kate was sleeping. It definitely wasn't Kate, because she was dead asleep. Totally freaked out, I refused to sleep in that room, and I went into the kitchen at the other end of the house with my aunt while she had a smoke. She then needed to use the loo again and left me standing there. I then noticed her dog sitting at my feet, so I bent down to pat him, and as I did, I felt the hand of someone rub my back. It didn't feel wrong though. It was like they were reassuring me that I was okay. When I stood up, no one was there. To this day, I still will not sleep in that room. And Kate has also seen and heard things in there.
So, the first experience happened when I was 7 or 8 years old, and we lived in a suburb called Malden in Darwin, Northern Territory. There were these Aboriginals from a community called Maningrida that lived up the road from us, and they were notorious for having a lot of domestic violence and always having cops and ambulances over their house. What happens when the families fight is that they start doing black magic on each other and sending evil spirits and curses to each other. One night, the cats and dogs in the neighborhood were extremely vocal. The dogs couldn't stop barking, and the cats are meowing and running from drain to drain, trying to find somewhere to hide. This went on for a good 4 hours until about 12 to 1 a.m. Me and my mum were sleeping, and my sister came running into the house saying, "Get up, there's an alien ship outside." We get up and go outside, and fair enough, there is something that's silver-colored and shaped like a typical saucer as you see in the movies, right above the Aboriginal's house. It had lights underneath it and projecting onto the ground, going in circles. They were a light blue color, and from the outside going into the center. It was biggest to smallest, and they were circular shaped. The lights just kept twirling around, and I wish I took a video, but back then phones weren't very common, and even if you did have a good phone, the camera quality was terrible in the early 2000s. It stayed there for a very long time, and then left. The next day, we heard of kids that had followed it on their BMX bikes from different suburbs away. This wasn't the only time it happened. It happened at least twice, and every single time it would start off with the dogs and the cats in the neighborhood going crazy. I know it wasn't a fake prop because of the animals, and at least 7 to 10 other witnesses had seen it. I seen a video on YouTube of cats sensing earthquakes before they hit because they have supersonic hearing, and I've also heard that before a natural catastrophe like a flood happens, animals will seek high ground a day before it happens. They know things that we don't for sure. The second weird thing that I seen was when we made a trip to Alice Springs. My sister was dating one of the boys that were from that house and that family. When we were in Alice Springs late at night, we happened to see another weird thing, which very closely resembles the old PS2 startup screen with the colored balls twirling around each other. There was 4 lights, colored orange, green, blue, and red, just twirling around each other in a pattern, maybe 12 feet in the air. It was so strange for it to be so prominent and just stay there for a long time doing it and allowing us to see it. My sister told me 15 years later that the reason the lights were following us was because her boyfriend had a curse on him. He was an accessory to a murder. He had given one of his relatives an axe to go and kill his wife, and the lights had followed us 1,500 plus kilometers all the way from Darwin. The third time was at my property in Berry Springs, maybe 60 kilometers out of Darwin City. A lot of people started telling us that they see lights on our property, and it's a rural property with lots of land because I'm a traditional owner. We thought it was thieves trying to come onto our property with flashlights and steal stuff while we were sleeping. I was around 11 to 12 years old when I saw the light for myself. It was late at night again, and I was going down the stairs because the toilet in the house is broken and I had to use the outside toilet. About 30 meters away, underneath a mango tree, I see a faint light, like an old torch when it loses its battery, and it starts to turn brown. I was about to yell out because I thought I was about to catch a thief, but very quickly I realized that it was gliding and sort of bobbing up and down, and maybe it noticed that I saw it. So the light went from a dim brown color to an immaculate gold color. I can't even describe the color, but it was like a small piece of the sun right in front of me at night. It's like when you see a lightning strike at night and it lights up the entire area around it. Well, I saw it in a compact ball, the size of a basketball. There is no man-made thing in this world that could match the brightness that I saw that night. It was incredibly bright. It opened my brain up to a whole new brightness that I've never seen in my life. It was kind of like a human spirit because it turned the corner as if it was walking. It didn't go through the wall that was nearby. and it stayed on the footpath. I would have stayed and stared at it, heading into the opposite direction, but as soon as I seen it turn the corner, I immediately thought that it could easily turn back around and come charging straight at me. I got incredibly scared and ran back up the stairs, and what made it worse was that I was home alone and couldn't go outside to pee. There is a common name for these lights called min lights, but I'm not sure if that's what I seen that night, because I've heard of people seeing the lights that were either green or red, but this one was a strange type of golden that I'd never seen on this earth. The fourth time was when my uncle was dating an Aboriginal woman from a community called Borroloola, and she had a niece whom my sister befriended. There were these things called hairy men. They are ugly little creatures that can pop into the spiritual realm and our realm. Kids are given these creatures as protectors apparently, and they can hop into their owner's body and help them fight. My sister and her friend that lived with us was stupid enough to accept one of these creatures as a friend. And that's when a lot of crazy things started happening in the house. For example, as we were taking showers, we would hear little giggles and knocks on the door. My mum would fall asleep on the lounge and wake up in a whole different spot at the front door. There was lots of other things that happened that I can't remember because this was at least 13 years ago. We were eating dinner one night, and for some reason, they loved coming out and tormenting us when it was a stormy night and raining heavily. Well, I happened to see one of its faces just peeking up from under the table looking at our food. I got a very quick glimpse of it. It had pale skin, a scar on its face going from top to bottom, and black hair that was very thin and horse-like. Immediately, I got up and screamed and threw the ashtray at it, but it disappeared. We left the house that night, and the next day all of our plates had no food on it. We had to go into town and find some Aboriginal men that knew how to get rid of these things through black magic. They came to the house and were doing all kinds of chants and rituals, and we even heard it in a bush nearby, and one of the guys threw a rock at it, and it made a dull thumping sound as if it hit flesh. And that was the last time we ever had any more paranormal experiences from them. When they were in our house, before the men came, I experienced my fourth paranormal encounter. We all started sleeping together in the lounge room because we were too scared to sleep alone, for obvious reasons. I was the only one awake, and I couldn't help but feel there was a presence in the house. I stayed up for maybe 4 hours, looking around the room because I felt like it could pop up out of nowhere, and I would easily see it. Well, it didn't show itself to me that night, but what it did do is start slamming the cupboard doors violently, at least 6 times. I literally didn't hear any footsteps in the house that night, but it was just on the other side of the wall, slamming the cupboards really hard like it was angry. And that was the most frightening experience of my life because I was the only person experiencing this. It's true that your fear feeds evil entities because I was scared that night and was really focusing on it, giving it my energy. It was really hard to go to sleep that night knowing that this thing had physical strength, but I did end up going to sleep out of pure exhaustion from staying up really late. All these experiences have helped me build my faith in becoming a Christian man because I know for sure that demons exist.
My partner and I, we moved into an old army barracks that was over 150 years old. It was, over time, turned into 4 conjoining homes. A lot of deaths had occurred there. The only reason that the house came up for rent was because the girl who lived there before us overdosed and died. It happened in our bedroom. My partner worked shift work 5 to 6 nights a week between the hours of 9 p.m. and could work up until 6 a.m. the next morning. When my partner would get home from work, I would always hear her coming in the door. and then she would come into the bedroom and kiss me. Some nights I had woken up to her just sitting on the side of the bed, looking at me. One night, I had the feeling that someone was in the room. I just assumed it was my partner, coming home from work. So I opened my eyes a bit, and there was this thing right in my face. I screamed, and just as a reaction, I swung my arm in its direction, and during this time, I had squeezed my eyes shut. But it was only for a moment. When I opened my eyes again, the black thing was gone. But I had woken up my partner, who I then remembered had not worked that night. She then said that something had suddenly woken her up only 10 minutes earlier. I would always leave the light on in the lounge room because I didn't want to be in that house in the dark. The light from the lounge room, it would light up our bedroom. I knew that this thing was not just a shadow. Also, due to my partner working night shift, I was often in bed alone, and I frequently got that feeling that I was not the only one in the room. If I ever had the feeling that I was not alone, then I would feel that they were standing beside the bed, looking at me. I would always turn around and face the wall, try to get to sleep that way. I just used to put it down that they were keeping me company while I was alone in the house. But I don't think that's true. It scared the hell out of me.
Okay, so these are my experiences of when I was growing up in a house so blatantly haunted. My friends only ever stayed over once. Might as well start at the daily occurrences. For context, the house was raised, so we had a garage and basically storage under the living space at ground level, so no animals walking on the ground and making noise in the house stuff. So we had the footsteps walking down the hall when there was only me in the house. The pantry door being open every morning. Dad would be up at like 4 a.m. to get ready for work, and it would be open, so he'd close it and blamed it on me for some time. Okay, so now onto the more wild stuff. I was hanging out with a mate of mine, and we made our way back to my place, and I realized I didn't have a key. So I asked him to just wait at the front door, and I'd go to the back door. We never bothered to lock the back door because we had a neo-mastiff. So I went around back, walked up the stairs and opened the door to the kitchen, and directly in front of me was a T-intersecting hallway and a shadow projected onto the wall. So first, the sun was a solid 90 degrees to the side of where the shadow could be mine. Second, it was standing full height from the door, and as I moved, it didn't. So I froze, and as my mind was processing what I was seeing, it turned and bolted towards the living room and front door. And yes, I both heard and felt the footfalls. So in that moment, my mind shifted from shadow to intruder, and I ran after it. I'm talking like 2 meters across the kitchen and about 3 to the living room. And I remember my friend was at the door waiting for me, so I just made for the door and realized there was nobody around. I opened the door and told my friend there might be something hiding right here, so help me check. Still nothing. Short one this time. Sitting at the computer at about 1 to 2 a.m. Felt a hot breath blow across the back of my neck. Jumped out of my skin with that one. I have 2 younger sisters, and I was watching TV with one of them in the living room, and decided I had enough and was going to bed. So got up and said goodnight. Started walking to my room, and at the end of the hall was a young girl in white PJs. And I just thought it was their younger sister and gave it no more thought for about 3 more steps. till I reached her doorway and she was sitting there, playing a Naruto game on the old PS2. That's when I looked back up the hall, and it was empty. I remember muttering, "Damn it, Bob." At this point, we had long since started calling the ghost Bob, just so we had something to call it. The fated friends' night over, so not much happened for most of the night, till we decided that it was bedtime. We were 19 at the time. Anyway, it was the following morning when I got up and went to the living room where my mate had slept, and he looked like hell. Our lights had an afterglow function so you could see for a few minutes after turning them off. Well, apparently, about an hour after I'd buggered off to bed, the lights clicked twice, and the blue glow clicked on, and that stirred him awake, thinking one of us was up. Then the front door started rattling in the frame like someone was outside, pushing and pulling on it. That eventually stopped, and not long after, he heard the footsteps going from the door, down the hall and back for some time. He said he pulled the blanket up over his head when the door started banging, and wasn't game enough to pull it down to see what was walking around. He flatly refused to stay a single night ever again in that house. This is just a snapshot of the shenanigans that we experienced in that house, but they are also the most memorable. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added in the new year. Also, I will be adding new designs to the merch store, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.